Hi, Frank here in the studio to talk to you about visual arts and the art making process. When we make art, ultimately what we're trying to do, whether we're aware of it or not, is communicate something. We have some kind of an intangible entity within us, and it may just be information, maybe it's an idea, maybe it's a thought, maybe it's a memory, maybe it's a story, a narrative, maybe it's something we want people to do, we want people to take action, we want people to think differently. But we have this intangible entity inside of us, and making the art is really our attempt to transform that intangible into some kind of tangible visual form. And why do we do that? So we can share it with other people, so that other people can experience the art and have the experience that we wanted them to have. Unfortunately, more often than not, people don't always have the experience that we intend. Now, on one level, we can only control the viewer's experience to a certain point because each of us will experience a work of art through our own subjective lens, through our own subjective reality. And we will bring our own prejudices, our own memories, our own ideas, our own likes and dislikes to the work and have our own unique individual response. But still, as an artist, we can, at least to a point, control the viewer's experience enough that a large number of people, if we're successful, and this is what I want to talk about, a large number of people will have the experience that we want them to have. But what happens when people don't have the experience that we want them to have? What happens when they have an experience that's very different than what we intended? Or what happens when they respond to our work with indifference, which I think sometimes is worse than having a bad response. I would almost rather have people lash out at my work with harsh criticism than to just ignore it. There's nothing worse than spending many hours working on a painting and hanging it up in a public place and having people just walk by and not even notice that it's there. So this is what I want to talk about today. What happens when people don't have the experience that we want? What does that mean? What are the reasons for that? And how do we respond to that? What do we do with that information? People aren't having the response to the work that we want them to have. If people aren't having the response to your work that you intended, it's generally for one of two reasons, which I'm going to break down right now. But the first is simply that you failed. You weren't successful at communicating. That whatever it was you were trying to turn into visual form, you didn't do it successfully. Maybe you chose the wrong colors. Maybe you chose the wrong medium. Maybe you didn't use the right composition. But you failed to communicate effectively whatever it is you were trying to say. And so when people see your work, they don't have the response that you wanted them to have. Does that mean you're a bad artist? Does that mean you don't have any talent? No. It just means you need to work harder. It means you need to study more. You need to practice more. You need to maybe talk to professionals, go to critiques. I did a video a while back about critiques, how important they are. Get feedback from people that have more experience than you do, and ask them, what am I doing wrong? Why isn't this working? Why aren't people having the experience that I want them to have? It's also important to pay attention and even ask questions. If people are having a different experience than you want them to have, because it could very well be that you either don't have the skill or you're just not making the right decisions when it comes to making the work. I live in rural northern Maine, and a lot of my work is inspired by the landscape, not because I have any strong affinity to landscape art or anything like that, but I do spend a lot of time outdoors. I like to work outside. I like the big open space and the natural light of the outdoors, so I've always been drawn to the landscape as a subject matter. And for years, one of the things that would happen, especially locally, people would see my work, which usually included old, dilapidated barns and houses, derelict houses that for some reason I was attracted to. And the response that the viewers would have to my work oftentimes would be, oh, I know that house, or I know that barn, and that would usually be followed by some anecdote about how their grandfather used to pick potatoes there, or how their cousin's uncle committed suicide in that house, or there was several weddings in that house, or something like that. And I always appreciated the fact that people were engaging with the work and with me and getting excited about it. But they weren't having the experience that I wanted them to have, because I was never interested in the specifics of the topography or the architecture of my subject matter. I was more interested in having the viewer have more of a more universal, general kind of emotional response to the colors and the shapes and the composition. And that wasn't happening. So I had to really think about my process and the choices that I was making. And what I ended up doing was really eliminating the barns and the houses from my paintings, and reducing the compositions to much more abstract landscape forms. And although my work is still tied to the landscape for its inspiration, the work contains no specifics in terms of architecture and specific locations that people will recognize. And it's made all the difference in the world to me. So it's important that if people aren't having the experience that you want them to have, ask yourself, is it me? Am I doing something wrong? Could I be doing something differently? Could I be doing something better in order to get people to have the experience that I want them to have? On the other hand, if people aren't having the experience that you want them to have, it may be that you're a great artist, you're a very effective communicator, and you have taken your thought, your idea, your story, whatever, and you have transformed it into visual form in the best way possible. The work is impeccably created. You've worked really hard studying and practicing. You have good technique. You have good knowledge. You're original. Your work is great. And people still aren't having the response that you want them to have. And that may be that it has absolutely nothing to do with you, that it's all about them. That they may have expectations that are very different than what you want them to have. And expectations are really important. A lot of people come to works of art with expectations. They have their own clear ideas about what they think art should do, what they think art should be about, what it should look like. And they don't want their expectations challenged. They want their expectations met. And people will come to a work of art with their own prejudices, with their own likes and dislikes. And if you're not meeting that criteria, then they're going to have a negative response to your work. And that may have absolutely nothing to do with the work. It's just about them. If somebody doesn't like the color red, and you use a lot of red in your paintings, then they're probably not going to like your work. That doesn't mean you're a bad painter or that you weren't successful in communicating your content. It just means that they don't like red. And it's really important not to take that kind of response or indifference on the part of the audience personally, because it really has nothing to do with you. Expectations are so important. And it's important that you realize when people are not having the response that you want them to have, that it may be because of their own expectations. John Constable, the British landscape painter and one of my personal heroes, faced a lot of indifference and backlash from his audience when he was showing his work in the Royal Academy in London, because at the time, Constable really advocated for landscape, the landscape, nature, as being the most important subject for serious art. But at the time, that wasn't the case. Artists treated landscape as a backdrop to paintings whose subject was narratives and personalities, people, stories from the Bible, stories from history, stories from contemporary events, and important characters that the audience would recognize. And the landscape was really just the background. And so when Constable showed his paintings of fields and skies filled with clouds and trees and essentially empty landscapes, he was met with all kinds of harsh criticism. It wasn't that he was a bad painter. He was a great painter, way ahead of his time. I mean, a genius, really. But the response that the audience had to his work had to do with him not meeting their expectations. They had clear expectations about what art should be, and he wasn't doing that. He was doing something different. And that could be the case with you. Maybe people aren't responding to your work the way you want them to because you're doing something that they've never seen before, that your work is innovative, it's creative, it's new, it's original, and people aren't used to that, and they don't want their expectations challenged. They want, sometimes people just want to feel smart. They see the work oh, I get it, I understand this, it must be good. And if they don't understand it, rather than work hard to figure out what the work means, what it is you're trying to say, and approach the work with an open mind, they'll just turn their back on it because it doesn't meet their expectations, and they don't understand it right away. And that happens. And that has nothing to do with you. That has absolutely nothing to do with you. So it's really important that if people aren't having the response to your work that you want them to have, that you ask yourself, is it me? Could I be doing something better? And really take that seriously, because that's an opportunity for you to learn. Unfortunately, I see people very often who make art and the audience doesn't respond to it the way they want them to. And sometimes that just means buying the work, right? I mean, what response do you want people to have to your work? Well, I want them to buy it. I want them to buy my paintings so I have money so I can make more paintings. People don't buy the work. And so the artists can view that as a criticism, as indifference on the part of the audience, and think that they failed. People didn't buy my work, I must not be a good painter. And unfortunately, some people will stop working because they just feel like they're not good enough, or they're not doing good enough work, that it's not really what they should be doing, making art. And that may not be the case at all. And if it is that, you're just not successfully communicating, that you haven't mastered your materials and you haven't mastered the language of visual form yet, and that's why people aren't having the response that you want, get to work. Work harder. Study. Practice. Take lessons. Take classes. Get critiques. Read books. Watch videos online. Do things to make yourself a better artist so that people will have the response that you want them to have. Or if people aren't having the response to your work that you want them to have, and you really feel like you're doing good work, and you're certain of that because you've studied and you've practiced and you've worked really hard, and you know that your work is good, and that you have communicated effectively exactly what it was you were trying to say, then maybe it's the audience. Maybe they just don't like art. If somebody walks by your painting that's hanging on the wall and doesn't even look at it, maybe it's because they have a lot on their mind. Maybe they're going through some stressful life event and they don't have time to look at your painting. They're in their head and they're thinking about whatever it is that's going on in their life, and they don't stop in their tracks to look at your painting. I mean, it's nice when that happens, right? When somebody's walking down the corridor and there's your painting and they stop in their tracks and maybe even drop to their knees and think, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I mean, we'd all like that to happen. And it does happen sometimes. But more often than not, people won't even take the time to look at your work, especially if it's hanging in a public place. If your work's in a gallery or a museum or some kind of a show where people are there to look at the art, they're more inclined to look at it. But I've even been to group shows and juried competitions and seen people at the gallery or the reception and just walk by work without even giving it 2 seconds of their time, because they immediately decide that this isn't for me. I'm not interested in this, and that has nothing to that may have nothing to do with you. That just might be them. Maybe your work isn't what they're looking for. And you can't please everybody. I had a woman come into my studio once, and I live in northern Maine. I'm about 4 hours from the coast, but we have potatoes up here, potatoes and trees, and people think we have lobster because it's Maine, right? Oh, you live in Maine, you must have lobster. No, I don't have lobster. I'm 4 hours from the coast. But this woman came into my studio once, and I have a little gallery space out front. I had my work hanging, and she was looking at my work, and she said to me, I had all these paintings of fields and old barns and big skies, and she said, do you have any lighthouses? And she seemed really upset that I didn't have any lighthouses. I could see the mind working. Who is this guy? He calls himself a Maine artist. He doesn't have any lighthouses. But there are no lighthouses around here, and I have no interest in lighthouses. So she obviously didn't buy anything, and she left. She didn't look very happy, not very impressed with me. But I didn't take it personally. It has nothing to do with me. Her expectations were, I'm in Maine, I go into a gallery, I want to see lighthouses. That's fine. That has nothing to do with me. I'm not going to paint lighthouses just to please someone like that. There are plenty of people on the coast that paint lighthouses. So that's really all I had to say today. Think about the response that people are having to your work. And if they're having the response that you want them to have, I mean, that's great. That's wonderful. And if they're not, ask yourself, is it me? Could I be doing something better? And if that's the case, do it. Work harder. Study. Get better. Make yourself a better artist. Use that as a motivation to improve. Or if you are confident that you're doing a good job and people still aren't having the response that you want, then understand it's about them. It's not about you. And don't take it personally. It has nothing to do with you, with your talent or your right to make art. I mean, everybody has a right to make art if they want to. And if people aren't having the response that you want them to have, maybe it's just about them. Okay? So don't take it personally. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. I do want to give a shout out to my son Damien for the new intro to my videos. He's quite a talented and creative videographer, and he put that little intro together for me, so thanks, Damien. And I want to thank you for taking the time to watch. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Share it with your friends or anyone you think may be interested, and have a great day. Talk to you soon.